Big Apple Rappin' by Spyder D, and this jewel was brought to you in 1980, and it was released by Detroit Records. And, you know, it's very funny to point out that this was the first rapper to release something on an independent label. And we're glad to be talking to him on the phone. Spyder D, good evening.
Hey, how you doing?
We're doing fine, thank you, because we're listening to good hip-hop, and that always makes us feel fine.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. It's an honor and a pleasure.
It certainly is. I would like to take you back to 1980 when, you know, this came out, Big Apple Rappin'. Was that the first record you made? Because, you know, starting your career on an independent label and as your first single, that's pretty amazing.
Well, actually, I was kind of doing two projects at once. Roller Skater Rap was one of them because I had met Vaughn Mason, who had that spectacular bounce rock skate roll multi-platinum hit. It was Vaughn Mason and crew. So he wanted me to do something in that vein. So I did a composition called Roller Skater Rap. And then I, at the same time, was starting my own label with Detroit Records. And the reason why I named it Detroit was because I was from New York, but I was in Detroit at the time because I went to school just outside Detroit at Eastern Michigan University. So it's kind of 1 and 1A as far as my beginnings and those releases, but significant about that was that on Big Apple Rappin', the reason why I wrote that was because I was away from home for the first time, you know, in the Detroit area. And so, you know, it made me appreciate New York more than I did when I lived there. And so that was kind of my tribute to my hometown, Big Apple Rappin'. And I tried to mention as many things that I could that had an influence on me growing up in New York. And for the record, yes, at 19, I was the first rapper to successfully start his own label, produce his own track, and release his own record on his own label. Nobody had done that at that point. And officially the record came out in January of 80, but I started the label in 1979. And at the time, you know, I didn't place any historical significance on it. It's only after all these years that I realized that I was the first to do that. And it's to me, it's quite an honor because a lot of hip-hop has been based on what independent labels were able to accomplish during the 12-inch record era.
So, going back to what you just said, basically, Big Apple Rapping was, you know, due to being a bit homesick.
Absolutely. When I went away to college, you know, just before I went away to college in 1978, I was under the influence of hip-hop because of a DJ that grew up around my area, which was Hollis, Queens, New York, which has spawned several superstars, including Run DMC, LL Cool J, Ja Rule. There's been a number of artists that have come from Queens.
Yeah, Orange Crush.
Davey DMX and I went to school together, along with Russell Simmons, in junior high school. So there's a number of hit makers and legendary artists that have come from Queens, and I just happened to join that bandwagon because hip hop was a passion. But yeah, I was definitely homesick. To answer your question, I was a basketball player, and so that's what brought me to going out of my state to go to school. And that was really the first time I had been outside of New York for any lengthy period of time. And yes, I was homesick, and that's why I wrote about New York. And that was the main reason why the track was titled Big Apple Rapping, because I was Big Apple homesick.
Cool. Just for my personal interest, because I played basketball as well, what was your position?
I was a 5'9" point guard. I played my cousin, who was like a couple of inches taller than me, like 5'11". He, in his sophomore and junior and senior years, was in the top 5 in scoring from the borough of Queens in New York. And, he was a major influence on me because he was so good. I had my own style of play. It was different from his. But I was pretty good at it. And as a point guard, I was, usually the one controlling all the action. And in a lot of instances, I was the one that had the ball in my hand as the game was on the line, and it was in the fourth quarter. And that particular experience taught me a lot, and I was able to put that towards my recording and hip-hop, because what it did for me was make me unafraid to fail. So, if I was going to bomb at being a rapper or a producer or a label executive, I wasn't afraid to fail at that, because basketball had taught me not to be afraid, to want to try to rise to the challenge.
Good stuff. Being, from New York and having stayed a prolonged period of time in Detroit, did you see any significant differences in the hip-hop and how it was lived in both New York and Detroit?
There was no hip-hop in Detroit.
None?
Zero.
Oh.
So actually, when you look at it in that context, because this was 78 going into 79, hip-hop had not yet truly exploded onto a national scene or even a global scene, other than a few select artists, Sugar Hill Gang, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, Kurtis Blow. That was kind of the scope of it, because a lot of industry executives didn't think hip-hop was going to last. So, especially the major labels, the Warner Brothers of the world, the Universals of the world, they looked at it like, it's a fad. It'll come and go. And once they realized that it was here to stay was when hip-hop really took off. And the person that made them realize that was Russell Simmons. And again, Russell and me and Davey D, we went to junior high school together at the ages of 13, 14, and 15 years old, way before hip-hop exploded on the commercial scene as a recording. And the main thing that happened in between the time that I started and the time that Vaughn Mason and his people picked me up to help me produce my records was that hip-hop went through what I call a lull. And I've always looked at myself, once I thought about it, is that I am a bridge between the original hip-hop hits that came out with Rapper's Delight, Sugar Hill Gang. Kurtis Blow was the first rapper on a major label. Jimmy Spicer had a big hit. King Tim III, which was actually the Fatback Band, actually did the first recorded rap record, albeit it was on an album of Fatback Band, so it didn't really get the notoriety ahead of the time of the Sugar Hill Gang because it wasn't released as a single. But that was actually the first recorded rap record released but it was on an album. So, rap went through that period where, okay, what's happening next? Who's going to step up next? Or is this thing going to die the death that everyone predicted for it, that it was just a fad? So I'm kind of proud to say that I was one of the artists that bridged that gap between the initial hit records and producing and releasing something that kept hip-hop commercially viable, and especially amongst the non-hip-hop crowd. See, Kurtis Blow opened up shows and or co-headline shows with major R&B artists. So that's what made him the king of rap. He was playing stadium-type venues before anybody as a rapper. And, you know, Kurtis and I went on the road together a little bit because we were playing on stations that didn't normally play hip-hop, but they played Kurtis Blow, they played Spyder D, they played Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. So, you know, I kind of bridged the gap, and what came right behind that was the Run DMCs, the LL Cool J's, the so-called beginning of the golden era of hip-hop. Now, the 90s are considered as the golden era of hip-hop, and that's not fair because we couldn't have gotten to the 90s if it wasn't for what LL Cool J, Run DMC, and a number of Beastie Boys, a number of notable other rappers did in the late 80s to get to the 90s. So, you know, hip-hop, as the history of it, has not yet been fully told in its proper perspective because there are people behind the scenes, especially DJs, that don't get the credit that they should because they weren't rappers and they weren't on recorded music. And that's a little unfair, and I'm hoping that, you know, eventually they get all of that stuff straight.
Well, we'll certainly try by, you know, keep calling people that were from that time and just know what was happening at the time.
And you know what's a good reference is my autobiography, which was written by a gentleman named Mark Skills, who also did a piece on the disco fever, which at the time, the disco fever was considered the mecca of hip-hop. If you didn't play the fever, you're not on the map. The fever was like, you know, you had to have done that venue to be considered anyone in hip-hop because that was, and that's located in the Bronx. And, of course, it's universally known that the Bronx is the birthplace, the Bronx, New York, is the birthplace of hip-hop. With that said, though, I'm truly happy that people like yourself and, you know, people out of the United States have understood what hip-hop means culturally. You know, the music aspect of it is one thing, but hip-hop is a culture. And, you know, I once told somebody, a gentleman, actually he was from South Africa, a Caucasian man from South Africa, and he wanted to understand the hip-hop culture better. And the thing that I explained to him was that, and I brought up a good friend of mine to set the example, Cool DJ Red Alert, who has been, he's a direct disciple and descendant of Africa Bambaataa and the Zulu Nation. But, you know, his nickname, Cool DJ Red Alert, that's not something that he slaps on himself in a convenient moment. That's who he is. Once he became Cool DJ Red Alert and using the skills of a DJ, that became who he is. It's not who he calls himself. It's not who he wants people to call him. That's who he is 24/7. He's Cool DJ Red Alert. And that's what people don't understand about hip-hop. I'm not Spyder D as just a brand. I'm Spyder D because once I branded myself through hip-hop, of which I was not an original partaker of, I was a basketball player who had a nickname Spyder. I got indoctrinated into the culture of hip-hop and became Spyder D. And my mother, till the day she died, God rest her soul, she didn't call me by the name that she gave me. She called me Spyder because she understood that hip-hop was a culture and that her son was a part of it. And I think that people in Europe and Asia and overseas away from the United States probably respect or get hip-hop as a culture more than we do here in America. And that, you know, that happens. Like in New York, everybody's a rapper. People's grandmothers are rappers. You know, they've seen it all, done it all. So it's, you know, they're kind of, they don't understand. They really don't understand how hip-hop has grown. And so New York is no longer the number one entity for hip-hop music as a recorded industry, and that's because they fail to understand that it has expanded since its birth in the early 70s of the Bronx, New York, and Harlem, New York.
Yeah. They kind of lost track with what hip-hop really is about.
Well, they just don't care what everybody else is doing. They don't care that hook lines and rap content is a little less complicated than what they want it to be. For example, when we were coming up, and again, I'm 56 now, so 1976 was where I really started to get into hip-hop, you know, as I was a basketball player, because at a lot of our games and basketball tournaments, there were DJs that were spinning R&B or whatever kind of record, and rappers would come and rap over the break part as the DJ would just keep that particular part of the record going. And that was the origins of hip-hop. And so 40 years later now, I've understood that the evolution of rap is from the time back in New York. Rappers in New York used to say the most complicated verses. They would actually have you to have to look in a dictionary to understand what the hell they were talking about. And New York has always prided themselves in having, I guess now they call it wordsmiths and lyricism. Hip-hop doesn't rely on that anymore. The simpler the hook, the simpler the rap. People no longer want to decipher what the hell you're saying when you rap. And New Yorkers still haven't gotten that for the most part. Now, they've had the recent release of Panda by Designer, and it's basically a record that sounds like Future. And I give him credit. He understood that, you know, this is what they're listening to in hip-hop now, so this is what I'm going to make it. That's not necessarily my position, but I understand his position.
Yeah.
Hip-hop over in Europe, Japan, Australia, Holland, it's no longer reliant on what New York does. And to me, that's the main change in what's happening in the hip-hop world today.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree.
Your format is hip-hop 24/7, or there's just a segment?
Unfortunately, it's just a segment, only two little hours a week.
That's cool. I mean, because you know what? when hip-hop finally expanded, what expanded it was Mr. Magic and DJ Marley Marl having a few hours on the weekend on WBLS, which was a major R&B pop station. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when their number one DJ in primetime hours played Run DMC's Sucker MCs, and I'm telling you because I was there, and I'm telling you, this was a lot of people don't realize this, including Run DMC. Russell Simmons might realize it, who's obviously Run's brother. But when Frankie Crocker of WBLS 107.5 in New York played Sucker MCs in the 4 to 8 hour drive time in New York City, the largest city in this country, that's when rap exploded. And that did not happen until 1984. Everybody jumped on Sugar Hill Gang, Rappers Delight, because it was new. Grandmaster Flash with The Message, because it was so real and raw about life in urban New York. But when Run DMC, Sucker MCs was their B-side, and I was on the same label with them at Profile Records. When everybody was playing It's Like That, which was their A-side to that 12-inch record. When Frankie Crocker flipped the record over and played Sucker MCs, hip-hop was changed and on the worldwide map forever.
That was a very good decision.
God rest his soul, Larry Smith, was the producer of both of those records, and I have to mention his name because he's no longer with us, and he was just a great man, a great producer. He did Houdini's biggest records. He did Run DMC's first two albums, which, again, changed hip-hop forever. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the name of my great friend, Larry Smith.
Yeah, Larry Smith wasn't the only one to cross your path later on in your career. You've already mentioned Russell Simmons, which you also went to school with. He became your mentor, kind of a way.
Yes, sir.
How did you guys meet up again?
Well, you know what? It's funny. I'm glad you asked that question. I told you, Davey DMX. You're familiar with One for the Treble?
Yep.
Davey DMX? Mm-hmm. Davey lived near Russell. So after I left junior high school, Davey and Russell were still in contact with each other because of their proximity. Davey D ended up replacing Run. Run is called DJ Run because he was originally Kurtis Blow's DJ. You remember Kurtis Blow was the king of rap. So Run was DJ Run at the time because he DJ'd for Kurtis Blow, but Run was still in school, and he couldn't make all of Kurtis Blow's appearances because he was still in school, and Russell and Run's father was a preacher, so he was very strict about school regulations and going to school. So Davey D became Kurtis Blow's DJ. Davey and I were great friends. We played ball together. Davey invited me to be in his band when we were like 14 years old. Davey D can play everything. He's the prince of hip-hop. He can play anything and everything, including being a great DJ. And so, the situation was, me and Davey had lost contact with each other for a while because I moved a lot. I moved around New York City a lot. My parents split up. It was a lot of, personal stuff. I moved around a lot. So one day, I saw Davey on Jamaica Avenue in Queens, New York. And we hadn't seen each other in, forever. And we started talking. And he said, yo, man, you heard Kurtis Blow? These Are the Breaks. I'm like, yeah, that record is dope. He said, yo, I'm his DJ. I was like, man, get out of here. Because I didn't know Davey DJ'd at the time. I was like, man, get out of here. So then I told him, I said, yo, you heard this cut, Smurfy's Dance? He said, yo, word, they be killing that at the Fever. I said, yo, that's me. He was like, get out of here. So, you know, we both had a get out of here moment after not seeing each other for so many years. It was so funny. And so to prove it, he said, yo, Kurtis is at my crib right now. Come through. So I said, all right, I'm going to the store for a minute, but I knew where Davey lived because we went to school together. So I rolled over to Davey's house. And sure enough, I walk into Davey's basement, and there is sitting Kurtis Blow. And I mean, I was in awe because at the time he was the king. And I was like, wow. And that was how Russell and I got reunited, because that was what Davey told me that night. He said, yo, Russell is our manager. You need to get with him. So that's how I got back in touch with Russell. Russell wanted to manage me. Russell introduced me to Larry Smith. I mean, man, I tell you, and if I get Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever as I get old, you guys keep this in your archive somewhere, because it is hip-hop history that no one else can tell you these things, because not a lot of people lived them. The early days of Rush Productions, Larry Smith played me the demo, the 8-track demo of Run DMC, Sucker MCs, It's Like That, before it ever got signed. I heard that in its infancy stage. And now that I'm 30-something years from that experience, I realize how important it was. I'm like, wow, I heard It's Like That, Sucker MCs in its purest form before the masses even knew it was coming.
History
and
in
now
the
it's
making.
one of the greatest hip-hop 12 inches of all time, and they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's incredible.
Wow.
It's incredible.
Wow. Let's continue with your career, though. You met up, you got back with Russell Simmons. He became your manager. What happened from there on out?
Well, there was a problem. There was a problem. After I did Smurfy's Dance with Vaughn Mason and crew, there was some ambiguity towards my actual recording contract with a little-known company called Telstar Cassettes, which is who Vaughn Mason signed to release Smurfy's Dance on. They shot my record around to a lot of different companies. A lot of different companies wanted to sign me and release that record. But Vaughn Mason, as my producer, or co-producer, I should say, at the time, because the reason why we were co-producers is because he took my original demo and did it with his production skills and his marketing process in mind. So the problem became between Vaughn Mason and the record company was, who did I belong to? Did I belong to the production company that brought me to the record company, or did the record company's new contract with me as an artist supersede Vaughn Mason's responsibility as my production team of records? So
yeah.
Behind Smurfy's Dance, I had to endure a 2-year absence as an artist because of that contract dispute. And it was crippling to me as an artist, but it also taught me to be a better producer, because that's all I could do in that interim. And that was mainly between the middle of 82 to the middle of 84, where I really couldn't produce a record as Spyder D, the artist. So I produced other artists just to kind of sharpen my skills and stay relevant. So once Russell came into the picture, now he's, like I say, he's expanding, he's growing. He's got the Fearless Four, who was another major label act. They were on Elektra Asylum, I believe. He picks up Houdini. He picks up LL Cool J. So Rush Productions grew with the industry. And I used to sit in the office with Russell a lot. And I got to understand his beliefs and what he thought where hip-hop was going. And he helped take it there. And it wasn't an easy process. It was it was a lot of sacrifices made. I used to listen to Russell turn down record deals. And when he get off the phone, I'm like, Russell, what the hell are you doing? He's like, yo, dude, that money they're offering is nothing. Hip-hop is going to be bigger than that. He's always had that vision, and I respect him for that. And he was right. Not only did he have the vision, and the reason why he had that vision, because he knew he was going to help hip-hop get to where his vision was, which is, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry as well as a lifestyle.
Exactly.
It's a culture. It's who people are every day they wake up. It's like, and I hate to give this analogy, but it's really true. It's like, some people are born into the gang life. Well, guess what? People are born into the hip-hop culture. It's like the minute they come out the womb, they are hip-hop by heredity. And that's not, and the beautiful thing about that now, it's just not here in America. It's where you're at. It's all over the world.
Yeah.
Parents that were raised on the hip-hop culture and become new parents, their offspring is now a part of the hip-hop culture, because when they get old enough to start listening to what their parents are listening to, now they're part of the hip-hop culture.
Exactly.
It's a culture. It's not a fad. And here's the most proud thing that I think I can say about my career. I have watched records that I produced and been at shows that I've been a part of where I can see nationalities and races and religions all together in one place in peace and harmony. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the biggest thing that my music in particular has done, and that hip-hop in general has done.
Yeah.
It has brought the races together. Now, there's still a lot of racial tension in America and abroad, but I can guarantee you it ain't in the hip-hop community.
Nope.
And at one point, and probably still at this point, there are more non-African Americans that buy hip-hop music than African Americans who make the hip-hop music. And that is a beautiful thing. To me, it's like the Beatles and their rock and roll, and Chuck Berry and his rock and roll, and Elvis the King Presley and his rock and roll. Mm-hmm. They brought all the people together.
Yeah.
So that's what I've tried to do in my music. I'm doing music now that's a little more socially conscious. Obviously, because I'm a little older now, so I want to teach some of the younger rappers that, it's good to talk about booty shaking and, all of that fly stuff. Mm-hmm. But, they got to understand that they have a voice now, powerful, more powerful than any of us, more powerful than Run DMC, Kurtis Blow, or any of the first real major acts, the Beastie Boys, because now we've got social media, we've got the internet, so now the voices in hip-hop are larger than ever.
Yep.
So what me, Chuck D, and a lot of the older hip-hop artists are trying to explain to the artists of today, it's cool to talk about what you live and what you're around, drugs, selling drugs, big booties, all of that. Yeah, that's a reality of ghetto life. We get it. But what you should be doing is teaching. You can, we're reporters. That's what rappers always have been.
Yep.
We are reporters of the urban plight in America. We tell what everybody else can't and don't see because they're not in our world. But you also have to teach the youth positivity. You can't label women as chitches and yos. I'm bleeping myself.
Yeah.
You can't glorify selling kilos because at the end of all those dreams, there's always jail time or death.
Yeah, exactly.
There's never a good ending to being a drug lord. Never, never, ever, ever. In the history of selling drugs, there's never a good ending to that. So, while you're, as they call it here in America now, sitting in the trap, making money selling drugs or whatever, guess what? If you don't get out of that game, you're going to be dead or in jail.
Exactly.
And so they need to say that.
Yeah, they do.
Need to tell everybody that.
But, being that conscious and telling something about society actually brings me to your latest work.
Yes, sir.
Because, you're still active.
Hate being black.
Yeah. I was a bit, not confused, but I was a bit taken aback by the title of the song. Can you explain what it's about, Spyder?
Well, the fact that you were taken aback, that was the purpose of the title. Whether you're black, white, anything in between. Hold on, my line is ringing. Let me get this person off the phone. Okay, never mind. I don't need to get them off the phone. That's a bill collector. Anyway, I had written I Hate Being Black a long time ago. I had actually thought about that title a long time ago. Back in the 50s, in the 60s, if you look through your archives and Wikipedia or whatever, a lot of the famous black people in the music industry or just in society in general, they had their hair slicked, what they called back then processed. That wasn't natural because as Africans and descendants of Africans, most of us had kinky hair.
Yeah.
Not straight, not slick. So if you straighten out and slicken your hair, you must not like who you are. Not to say that in a disrespectful manner. It's just that at some point in your life, being a Negro, as they used to call us, was unappealing. Your nose was big, your lips was big. These are the stereotypes that people drew us in caricatures in cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And, even today on my Twitter page, which is at SPYDERD, capital S and capital D, twitter.com at Spyder D, I try to document, even today, how often that is said, and that's just on Twitter. In America, I hate being black. And that sentence, that phrase is uttered all over America every day. And not just America, anywhere there is dark-skinned, African-descended people, that sentence is uttered. And it's not that they hate their race or that they hate who they are. They hate how who they are is treated.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I hate being black is a metaphor.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't like myself. I wouldn't be anyone else. I wouldn't wish to be anyone else than who I am. But what I wanted to do in invoking that particular title was to let people know that, and it's a big controversy now here in America because San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick refused to acknowledge the national anthem. So because he's an athlete, he's got a big forum, and that's the same thing I keep trying to some of these younger artists. So, Colin Kaepernick, and that was a bold statement, just like I hate being black is a bold statement. But the thing I'm trying to get across is I wanted non-blacks to sort of get a window into what it is being black, especially here in America, and I wanted my own people, other blacks, to take a look at some of the choices that they make on an everyday basis and, really examine it. Like Michael Jackson, the man in the mirror. Look in the mirror. Before you start criticizing everything else, look in the mirror at yourself. You got to look at yourself before you start pointing fingers everywhere else.
True.
Once you're comfortable with the person that's in the mirror, now you can start, trying to evoke change elsewhere. So that was the whole point of I hate being black.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, once you get total acceptance of yourself, you probably don't see that many faults in others because you're acceptant of that as well.
Exactly, because, I looked at, as I was writing it, I looked at a lot of choices that I made when I was young. And part of it was because when you're born black in America, you already have strikes against you. From the minute the doctor smacks you on your behind and you go, and you start crying and you're put in your mother's and father's arms, you're already behind the 8 ball. So knowing that, and it's still that way in America, unfortunately, but knowing that is half the battle. Obviously, Barack Obama was born under that same plight, but he educated himself. He made a difference as a leader in the community of Chicago, and then had the audacity to run for the highest office in the free world as the President of the United States. And it doesn't matter whether you're Asian, European, from a tiny island, or a faraway, desolate, barely populated province of the world, you can become anything.
Exactly.
And that is, to me, that is what music, and that is what I do, and that's what I hate being black, is trying to do, is let people know that. Because there's been some tough times in recent years, for the last decade or so, and a lot of people have lost faith in life. I don't have the exact statistics in front of me now, but suicide amongst teens that are disillusioned, and especially among ethnic teens, I'm sure, without looking at a statistic, has to be at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Because people are looking at things, not just their personal life, but they're looking at, what hope do I have for my future? So that's what I'm trying to do with the whole concept of I hate being black. And the follow-up to that is Break the Chains, where I have enlisted the talents of 2 white rappers that I know here in the United States. And I thought it was very important to get their take on all of this racial divide and racial strife, which seems to be, when we thought it was over, yet here it is, and here it still is. And I wanted to get their perspective. So I only wrote 1 verse to Breaking the Chains because I wanted them to do 2 verses, because I thought their perspective was important on this follow-up, because my perspective is made clear on the different versions of I hate being black. And again, you know, my son, I have a 10-year-old son, and I want the world in his future to be better than it is now. And so, again, to answer your question about the title, it was purposely meant to be provocative so it could grab your attention so that you would then take that attention and listen and watch, if you're looking at the video, to what is being said and what the meaning of it all is for every ethnicity, every one of them, not just black, whether it's Native American Indians, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, Middle European, Germany, Italian. We all, because of our geography, have been raised differently, but we're all the same. And that's what I try to reawaken people to. You know, so it's sort of a new social media commentary. I'm trying to grab people's attention like the late, great Martin Luther King did with his protest. I'm protesting through the gift of music, but I'm also educating through the gift of music. And so that's really the whole purpose of I Hate Being Black, the concept and the follow-up of Break the Chains, because we're all in chains. Every one of us, I'm speaking to you right now, you're being chained by whatever the stereotypes you've been taught about different ethnicities. We're all in chain. We're all in bondage. And we need to break free of those chains by just having an open mind.
Exactly.
It's not saying, you know, go out and marry a black girl or, you know, go out and marry a Caucasian man or European. It's just keep an open mind. Love everybody, but it starts with loving yourself. You got to love yourself first. Once you love yourself, it becomes easier to love others and be more tolerable of others.
That's a very, very good message, and I think the message that hip-hop started out with in the first place.
And you know what? You're 100% right. And here's the evidence that backs that up. Africa Bambaataa. He was the warlord for the biggest gang chapter in New York City in the 70s. Africa Bambaataa put down his knife, he put down his gun, he put down his authority in gang life in the biggest city in America and transformed that to hip-hop. The breakdance, graffiti, rap beginnings of the culture of hip-hop. So when people had a beef, they stopped shooting and stabbing each other. They met at a pre-appointed place, and they had breakdance and rap battles against each other, as opposed to sticking knives in each other and shooting each other.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's that to me is the biggest statement on hip hop. Is Africa Bambaataa's background. It doesn't get enough notoriety because, you know, he had a few early hits, Planet Rock, and, you know, all of the other rappers that came along, the bombardment of hip-hop after that kind of drowned his story out. But people really need to research hip-hop as a culture, not just the musical aspect of it. And they'd be surprised and they'd learn a lot.
Yeah.
And they'd feel better about who they are in life.
I agree. Spyder, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. And of course, we're not only going to be talking about I Hate Being Black, we're also going to play it. Once again, Spyder D, thank you very much for giving us the insight in the early years of hip-hop. And it's very good to see that how it has started out. It has changed somewhat in the course of time. But sometimes it goes right back to the beginning with songs like I Hate Being Black.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Audience, be safe. Peace.